Good afternoon. Welcome to Remaking the Economy, Rethinking Journalism. I'm Steve Dubb, Senior Editor of Economic Justice here at Nonprofit Quarterly, coming to you from Boston on land historically stewarded by the Massachusetts Nation. For this webinar, developed in partnership with the Institute for Nonprofit News, we will look at the state of journalism and explore how it can advance economic justice. For this conversation, we are joined by three expert panelists. Jordan Bennett-Bagai is editor-in-chief of ICT, formerly Indian Country Today, a national publication that features stories that make Indigenous peoples come alive. Derek Kane is director of community engagement at Resolve Philly in Philadelphia, which works with newsrooms to guide community engagement strategies. And Crystal Good is publisher of Black by God, the West Virginian, a community-based publication that centers Black stories and life in West Virginia and Appalachia. A few notes. First, we're very excited to take your questions. Please enter your questions into the question box at the bottom of your screen, and I'll share as many of them as I can. Second, we will share the slides and recording after the webinar. So please don't ask, will I get the slides and recording? You will. Typically, we are able to provide those by the following Monday. One last thing, the webinar is free, but producing it is not. So if you like what we're doing and can afford to support NPQ's racial and economic justice work, please consider making a donation to NPQ today. We also encourage you to join the conversation via social media with hashtag Rebuild the Economy. Thanks so much for joining us. And at the end, there'll be a brief survey. Please complete that survey to help inform our future work in the webinars we do in 2024. And with that, if you can discuss a little bit about the mission of Black by God, the West Virginia. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. And hello, everybody. I'd love to know if there are any Appalachians listening. So please, use the chat, say hi. I'm Crystal Good, the publisher and founder of Black by God, the West Virginian. And our mission is to tell a more nuanced portrayal of Black experience in the Appalachian region. And we tell Black Appalachian stories in all their manifestations. At least we try really hard to. And just for some clarity, our name, Black by God, as powerful as that is really a turn on the expression West by God Virginian, which is a way that we West Virginians like to help other people know that we are not part of Virginia. So West by God Virginia became Black by God, the West Virginian. And we're multimedia. So we're on, we've got a website, we use social media, but we also do a print, which is a wonderful tool, especially in a region like Central Appalachia, where the internet can be a little bit questionable. So we do a print, and we work with community journalists, we work with freelance journalists, and we're always looking for folks that want to help us tell these stories. And our platform, I kind of look at it this way, as our rings of influence. Our target audience is Black West Virginia. But then we look at who are the folks outside of Black West Virginia, and that's the expanded Appalachian audience, the West Virginia diaspora. And then there's all kinds of folks across the country that are very interested in what Black by God's doing because they're interested in media. They're interested in democracy, right? They're interested in the topic that we have here today. And so Black by God's been around since 2020, and I started it with the help of West Virginia University and their New Start program. And today we're supported with a lot of thought leadership from Tiny News and also from IndieGraph, if you've heard of this. So I want to give our partners a shout out. So happy to be here with you all.
Thanks so much. Derek, do you want to introduce yourself and talk about Resolve Philly?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. I'm definitely always appreciative of everybody that takes the time out to listen to any of these webinars and enjoy it and have this dialogue back and forth. Yes, I'm Derek Kane. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at Resolve Philly. Resolve Philly is a journalism nonprofit, and our initiatives push the field of journalism to be more equitable, collaborative, and based in community voices and solutions. And Resolve Philly, three pillars of success of our newsroom of the future is participatory, community, responsive journalism, bridging the information divide, as well as collaborative journalism. most of you may know Resolve Philly from one of our initiatives called Broken Philly, which we sunsetted a few months ago. Resolve Philly, Broken Philly was a collaborative of 29 news organizations. We are now called the Philadelphia Journalism Collaborative, which will be starting our collaborative efforts starting in January, where we will be working on with other news organizations. One common goal as far as helping economic mobility in the city of Philadelphia. So that's a little bit about Resolve Philly and who I am.
Eric, thanks so much. Jordan, if you could introduce yourself in ICT, that would be great.
Yat ish Jordan bin Bigayanchik, ya Aniasha, Madashiji Bashachi, Nakadina Edashache, Oze Tachini Dashanella. I'm Jordan Bennett Bigay, and that's how I introduce myself as a Navajo woman. I am of the Towering House clan, born for the Coyote Pass people. My maternal grandfather is of the Mexican clan, and my paternal grandfather is Red Running to Water with Hopi. I'm from New Mexico, and I'm based in Washington, D.C., out of our many bureaus across the country, and we're continuing the bureau expansion as well. ICT, we were formerly an in-country. Today we were branded about a year and a half ago, and that came just out of an interesting conversation after George Floyd's death, and asking ourselves, what do we call ourselves, especially as we go into the future and young people reclaiming their identity rather than what names colonizers gave to us. But we also want to respect the legacy that Indian country today is for older folks. So our name is ICT now. We are owned by our parent company, Indigenous Public Media. And that happened about 2021. We used to be owned by the National Congress of American Indians. And I guess a little bit of our history real quick. We are 42 years old. We are a startup that's about 40-ish years old. We first started out as a newspaper on Pine Ridge. Our founder, Tim Gallego, was the one who started it and wanted to cover Lakota issues on his res up there in South Dakota. And he saw the need to cover Native American and Alaska Native issues across the country. So he expanded his coverage and built a couple of bureaus or few bureaus across the country. And then he sold it to the Oneida Nation tribe in New York. And then they sold it and folded it in 2017 because it got too expensive, apparently. And then they they gifted the assets to the National Congress of American Indians. So that's where our founding editor there, Mark Trahant, was the one who stepped in, was hired, and kind of rebuilt it to what it is now, which is about 5 years ago at this point. So Indigenous Public Media owns us now. They also own the ICT newscast with Aaliyah Chavez. We have a broadcast that reaches 75 million households, plus Winnipeg, Canada, and also in Australia as well. But we're all about covering Native American, Alaska Native, and Indigenous peoples across, the world, but mostly focused right here for now. And as we expand, we try to do our best globally. That's us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jordan. And really, there could be a whole webinar on that whole story there. But appreciate it because it really sets up our first question. Journalism is changing. And obviously there's been a lot of consolidation, a lot of layoffs. There's a lot of new nonprofit media like ICT, for example. So how do all of you think about this question of what is journalism now? What should it be? And specifically, what stories does journalism need to tell?
Well, I will say that my mind is really fresh. I came from a couple of weeks ago an event at Howard University that Nicole Hannah-Jones put on called Democracy in Journalism. I encourage everybody, please go Google it now. And that really helped me to recenter my work. I've always known that what I was doing and building with Black by God was centered in democracy and a great need in this country. I believe their slogan there at Howard is truth over power. And as a Black newspaper in the center of central West Virginia, I can tell you that that's about all I got is truth over power. So the future of journalism to me looks like something I've heard, when folks talk about a big J or a little J, I went and got my master's at WVU in journalism without any experience. And although I hold that piece of paper, what I learned going through that process with other journalists was that my experience as a poet, as a performer, as a lobbyist, an advocate, that was just as valuable. And pair that beside some seasoned journalists, and you really have a beautiful way to tell a story. So my hope is that the future of journalism will, keep the principles and the tenets of journalism, right? But also understand that there's nothing more valuable than what I call folk reporters. And those are the everyday people that are attending their city council meetings, that are participating in civic engagement and telling those stories in their voices, because at the end of the day, it's all about trust for any of us here, right? If our audiences don't trust us, then we don't have a product and we're not fulfilling our mission. So for me, the future of journalism looks like it's more inclusive, and we really start talking about how do we build community journalists.
Definitely love that, Crystal. I couldn't have said it better. I definitely feel exactly the same way what we're doing at Resolve Philly. We're thinking about journalism in a way where, and when I started off with our 3 pillars, this participatory community engagement is working with communities, not talking to communities, not talking at communities, but working with them to help tell more accurate stories. Also, I'm hoping in the mission in mind is also, and Resolve as well, is working with journalists, especially to understand more of the communities that they're reporting on. Oftentimes they don't know the communities that they're reporting on, or they're just, coming in, parachuting in, getting a soundbite and leaving. We want communities to understand the importance of relationship building in these communities in order to be able to tell these accurate stories, because it's coming from them and their lived experience. It's something that is important to them, just like it's important to getting it right. So it's working with journalism, working with journalists to be able to tell these stories accurately and working and building relationships in the communities that they report on.
Echoing everything they said. No, I think it is definitely working, at least for our communities. We focus on Indigenous nations, Indigenous people, as being about transparent, because a lot of them really don't talk to journalists every day, right? So it's part of bringing in that trauma-informed journalism training that a lot of us kind of already innately have, and explaining the process to them, like what's the story, how does it happen, what's going to happen after the fact too, and how's that going to impact me. And that's part of trauma-informed journalism, right? But also, you said it, Steve, I think the business models are changing for our industry too. Like, we're a nonprofit, and at least for our newsroom, we're trying to figure out how does that work? How do we fulfill grant reporting requirements? How do we, continue to build a sustainable business model to make us, again, sustainable? We had so many iterations of ICT, and it's like, how do we build this for success? And how do we continue to tell big funders that our stories are important? Because they are, right? We focus on Indigenous journalists trying to tell Indigenous stories, because for so long, our own stories were told by non-Native people, right? And they're told inaccurately, without context. And so we try to, make up for that by giving the context, giving the nuance, and telling them what pretty much our American education system failed to tell a lot of America is the history, that Indigenous history is actually American history as well. And I think for us too, it's mobile focus. I think, everyone's on their phones. And so that's been part of the huge drive for ICT since we were birthed. We came back 5 years ago, was, everyone reads on their phone. Two-thirds of our readers get their news from their phone for us. And so we try to think, if we're going to present the story, what does it look like on the phone first? And then desktop comes after that too. Yes, that's for us.
Great, thanks everyone. Well, I wanted to ask about what does community-based media look like, and particularly this question of accountability. How do you maintain accountability? And it might help, if you could talk about a story you worked on that achieved that. But if anyone who would like to jump in first.
Yeah, I'll start. Community-based, what it looks like at Resolve Philly is we have multiple ways that we reach our communities, and one of them is with our community newsletter that is written with the communities that we report on. So we bring them in the fold, and we work with them to come up with stories within their neighborhoods to be represented in our newsletter. So it starts with that. So it's working with communities, as I mentioned earlier, having a physical newsletter, because I know in the city of Philadelphia, we have a digital divide. So oftentimes folks don't always have internet or don't have really good, strong internet. So we make sure that we're reaching them through the internet, through text message. We have a free text text line as well. And our free community newsletters where we actually go out in communities and hand it out. And also community members hand it out as well. So that's what community-based looks like for us, because we always try to work with communities, not, again, earlier, as I said, not talking at them. And also, as far as accountability, I know for us, it's not really a piece that's been written more so. It's for us, for instance, we go out in the community, we ask, what are we missing? What's media missing? How do you, what's going on in the community that, these politicians or the city council people are not doing? And then that's taken back to them as well as and saying, here, this is what the community is saying, your constituents are saying in your community. Here's what's missing. And we can also do that with other journalists and other news organizations as well. It's holding folks accountable that these things are not working now, or these things, they need to highlight this more, or just having this conversation to get, to bridge that information divide, I think is probably the best way of how we hold people accountable as well.
Well, I appreciate the work that Resolve Philly does, because it's such a model for publications like Black by God. And we have a folk reporters program, and we're getting our folk reporters program going. And that's just sort of a blending of my background as a folklorist and as a journalist. And I love the field work, right? And I truly believe that if we just document the stories, right, and talk to the people, let's talk to our elders, let's talk to folks, let's talk to young people, that there's power in that. And so developing a folk reporters program, to me, is how we can create accountability. And then I'll pair that beside some of the work that Black by God does. I'm very proud of a story that ran last year during legislative session. There was a comment casually made in a committee meeting, right? As things do in lawmaking, it all goes down in the committees. And in this particular committee meeting, they were working to ban Black folks and gay folks and women from buying car dealerships. Now, this is a true story, I'm telling you, because it's on the record and is recorded. And Black by God was the only publication to cover that. And a lot of the work that Black by God has been doing around accountability has been around ARPA funding. And I'm sure folks on here have heard of ARPA and how that was distributed through COVID. And so we've really kind of kept ourselves on a beat. So, I stay encouraged that although our readership is growing, we are small, but we are potent, and people are paying attention to Black by God, and we are changing the media landscape in our local communities just by existing. So to me, our accountability comes with, first, as Jordan was saying, our ability to be sustainable. So without that, right, we don't have the stories, we don't have the community. So, accountability to me looks like sustainability, but it also looks like, how do we encourage the community to participate in the journalism?
Oh, that's always a hard one, trying to get them to participate in it. But I think in the end, if it's done, like I said, if it's done by people who look like them and have experiences like them, you're more, you get that, participation. For us, the community-based media, what it looks like for us is, again, an Indigenous-led newsroom by Indigenous journalists. Again, I said it earlier, nuance and context you can't find anywhere else, even in mainstream media. And one example is, we have a political reporter here in DC, and she went to a Senate committee on Indian Affairs hearing, and the New York Times White House correspondent, or maybe just the Hill correspondent, went up to her and said, "Oh, I read all your stories, because sometimes I don't know I don't know what I'm listening to. I got to get context in your stories." And I was like, wow, that is incredible to know that, even, these legacy media, they don't know, right? And so that's where we come in and fill the gaps. But it's a story for another time. And, just because, for mainstream, just because, or even the newsroom trainings I do for the Indigenous Journalists Association, I always tell these newsrooms that just because a story is new to you, it's not new to the community. And I think that's why we push Indigenous journalists to be in these newsrooms, is because they know the issues that are important to their communities, and that can push the needle forward, right? Instead of explaining the story over and over again. Yes, what other, I wrote some notes here. Some other ways that community media, could look like is us constantly following through on issues that aren't sexy, and even continuing to follow it, when mainstream finds it sexy suddenly. Standing Rock's a good example of that, right? And how that kind of just was a global movement that came, that started out, from Indigenous media first, and then suddenly mainstream caught on to it. We try to reach audiences, the way that we know how to. We give out free content, like anything with an ICT byline, photos, videos. We let anybody use, because our story needs to get out there. We try to work with tribal newspapers and tell them the same thing. Tribal radio stations, we let them know that our newscasts, that they can use it, and a lot of tribal newspapers do use it, and that's because a lot of our elders still listen to tribal radio stations, or even up in Alaska too. That's the only thing they get, so it really helps them out. And I think the other thing is, and Crystal kind of alluded to it earlier, was we try to diversify our sources and show people how diverse our Indigenous nations are, right? Just because one policy affects one tribe a certain way, it's going to affect another a different way. The Violence Against Women Act is a great example of that. It can affect the lower 48 differently from how it affects folks in Alaska to Native Hawaiians there. And sometimes, that's one way to change policy, right? But I guess the last thing was community involvement, right? We try to go to the community and get feedback. They love our newscast. What can they do better? One way we're doing this is with a partnership with the PBS NewsHour, and trying to cover climate change, but also using it as a way to gather data on our different audiences and seeing how they respond to each of our contents differently, right? And what's making that different, what's causing that too. But overall, I think just transparency is what we try to do as well.
Great, thanks. Well, I wanted to ask about, so this is economic justice webinar. So I wanted to ask about what effective strategies that journalism can use to promote economic justice and hold public officials and private corporations accountable. And I imagine you probably have some good stories to share on that as well, but who would like to jump in?
Guess I'll go first again. I feel like in that situation for us, it's about educating educating our audience. Oftentimes, we can't assume that everybody has access to this information or know what justice there is to fight for, or maybe want more information. For us, it's about going out in the community and seeing what those needs are, what information that they can use in order to be able to fight or promote economic justice. So example is that we have these things it's called Sound Off. It's our signature Sound Off events, and this one is called the Sound Off Conversations, where we have these conversations talking with community members about their needs and things that they may want to know more about. And then we come back with our Sound Off info session, which is strictly about information needs. We're bringing that, it's the feedback loop. We go back to the community and say, okay, you want to know more about estate planning. You want to know more about how do I promote, or how do I be a part of the zoning conference or zoning meetings that they're having in my community. Just anything that we can get back with information, and that arms the communities with, for them to be able to do and have and promote when it comes time for the stuff that matters to them. So it's not really us asking, that's not really us going to the community saying this is what we think you need. It's more about the community saying to us, this is what we need, and we bring that back to the community. So that's how we promote it at Resolve Philly.
I think in that part, I agree with Derek too. It's about reframing it and saying like we're a public service, and that's what we're always telling like our readers. We're here to serve you. What do you need? What do you need? Do you need us to break it down for you? We'll do that, right? And I know the election's coming up, and that's always a huge part of it, right? Just knowing the deadlines, where to register, who's running for office, what do they care about? They want that basic information because there's so much, right? And it's our job to kind of distill it down and talk to them and make it easier for them.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. And one of the journalists, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the publication, but everybody knows Candace. And Candace was saying that, don't ask what stories people want to read. Ask them what would improve their life today. And that really stuck with me. So, what can Black by God do to help your life today? Or do we need stories on how to take care of senior citizens or find daycares or, and I think the reframing of that question kind of opens it up, as opposed to and back to what Jordan said about this is a public service. But I'm going to answer this a little bit differently, because the economic question for me is back to sustainability. And when you look at the amount of philanthropy, and everybody knows there's a huge philanthropy drop that's supposed to help small publications, $500 million, right? Something like that. And how philanthropy moves. And I can tell you that in the short time that I've started Black by God, I have seen those philanthropy dollars move, and I have seen more newsrooms open in Central Appalachia with fully funded reporters, fully funded, and functioning newsrooms. And I have to tell you that, it's a little burr in my craw, because I'm working really hard. And yet, so I think that the economic question really comes to how can small publications like Black by God grow, and more Black by Gods and more diversity in the industry, because what I'm seeing is something of a rinse and repeat, right? And one of the things that's very interesting, and I really appreciate the story of the New York Times journalist Jordan, because one of the things with Black by God is that we are not pulling an audience from an existing publication. We didn't open up as journalists and reporters that already had an audience, and we all know how journalists are on Twitter, right? We opened, and we're building that audience from the ground up. So, that to me is really important, because, we're not just jumping from here to there to here to there and taking an audience that already cares about the news or cares about West Virginia legislature or, cares about these things. We're truly building an audience from the ground up. And to me, the economic question is, how can we keep building that and be sustainable in the process?
So I think I'm going to ask a follow-up, there's a question from the audience actually about what does economic justice mean to you, and how do you promote economic justice and sustainability within your organizations? And, and I would add, there's also issues of the hiding of economic injustice, right? So there's accountability of corporate actors or government corruption or what have you. So there's a lot of different angles to this question, and I just wanted to get you to comment on that a little bit more.
Can you repeat that, Steve? I need a little clarity.
Well, there's two pieces. One is what does economic justice mean to you, right? But it's also, there's a lot of economic injustice that we're covering in the media. There are corporations that are stealing money from people or not providing services, or politicians that are on the take or what have you. So how are you? How's the work that you're doing, helping to preserve accountability in the community of these officials to the community?
Well, I think one of the things I always tell the folk reporters or any person that's working with Black by God, when you go in that room, you change it, period. And so for a lot of the community journalists that I work with, I just remind them that witnessing can often be enough. When, Black by God reporters, maybe they have a Black by God t-shirt on, maybe they have a Black by God reporter notepad, but we're there and we're present and we're paying attention, right? And I think that for some people is curious. For others, it might be a little bit scary, because we do follow up, and we're trying and we're there. And so I think a lot of things, a lot of justice and economic justice, whether you're reporting on corporations, whatever, it just changes when a person is in the room. And so for me, sometimes it's just as simple as showing up.
Yeah, for us at Resolve, it's like, for an example, we have an investigator, Steve Volk, who works at Resolve Philly, and he's uncovering some stuff with the Philadelphia foster care system. And for example, we uncover something that's going on as far as especially economic that's affecting the community members of the people who are a part of the foster care system or who are aged out. And we're seeing that something's going on that's, I'm trying to think of the correct word, I guess this corruption of how they're dealing with money and dealing with folks that are in that space. How do we report that? Is how do we bring agency to those people in that in that community is making them aware of these things that are happening. And the only reason why we know this happening is because of the work that we're doing on the ground and working with folks and hearing these different stories. And then once you hear these different stories and you collect all these different people that's giving input on this, then we're able to uncover what's going on, and then we expose it by putting out in print or newsletter or where we can to bring more awareness to this, that this is happening not just for you, it's happening with many people. And we work with those people to come up with, or how to come up with better reporting around that so we can make people aware of it. I think that's all a part of it too. It's just you don't know really what's going on in the community until you get out there and find out. And then you work through that and you do the investigative reporting to find out what's going on, and then you expose it. So I think for us, that's another way you can promote the economic justice.
I think Crystal kind of said it, like it's showing up is like, I feel like it's half the battle, and then asking the question, because, in a lot of these times, at least for Indigenous journalists, like it was very hard for us to be in these spaces, right? I mean, now it's me or like our political reporter who are in the White House, like asking questions with our moccasins on, and being who we are, and at least for the stories, for economic justice, I think a lot of it is humanizing it too, right? And making these officials know that they're affecting like real people, right? Real people, and the decisions they make have huge like impact, detriment, harmful ones too, if that. And then for tribal nations too, we're always bringing it back to, the federal government has trust and treaty obligations to our nations. Like, and in the Constitution, it says treaties, are the supreme law of the land. So if that's not being followed, like you're not doing your job, right? And that's what always comes to, and we're always saying like we are political entities. We, our tribal leaders are doing the best that they can, but also, what's the federal government doing? Are you upholding your end of this deal that you signed many, many years ago? I mean, they still recite the Constitution to this day, so I don't know how they can't miss that line.
Great. Thanks. I also wanted to ask about how can community and nonprofit media effectively address the growing menace of disinformation?
Well, that's a big one. And I think we all have to start talking about what is disinformation and how it runs through our communities with real examples, right? So we all know, quote unquote, Fox News and what the national conversation is. And I think it's important to localize that, right? And remind people, to ask the questions. That's one thing that I get asked and that I can witness is that, a lot of journalists just aren't, mainstream journalists in local communities aren't really going in for the gut punch there. And so I think that there's room to remind journalists in our communities, we have to be brave and ask hard questions. And then when we ask the hard questions, especially in, the community like West Virginia, where, we've seen our governor, pick and choose all through COVID who he would answer questions from. Locally, our local Charleston City Council just passed a new ordinance that requires local reporters to have press passes, and that everybody must be a daily. So there's a lot of challenges that are going on that I can see on how disinformation spreads, and where accountability can go unchecked. So to me, it's how can we, Black by God, and small news source, localize what that disinformation looks like in our communities.
Yeah, I second that what Crystal said. It's just really getting out there and educating our communities. It really is. I know and we were having a conversation about this a few months back. Not a few months back. Yeah, a few months back. When one of the community members asked me, what's the difference between misinformation and disinformation? They wanted to know the difference between the two and have that conversation. So it's about educating our communities, working with them and then we had a whole workshop talking about that, the difference between the two and how they get their information and stuff like that. So I think it goes back to what Crystal said. It's just really working with communities, having these conversations, and really trying to dig through a lot of the stuff that's happening currently in media and working with them to try to work that out so where they're getting the information they feel is accurate and fact-based.
No, and I agree. I think it's about being transparent and fair, and always follow-ups, like Crystal, asking the hard questions, and explainers. I mean, I like them. It's very simple. But I think, we just need to distill the information down. And at least for our newsroom, we also take transparency to another level. And if sources want to come to our story budget meetings, they can come. Like, I think anybody can come just to see like how that happens behind the scenes, and how, you know, we see a story, and people don't know that, right?
Great, thanks. So I'm going to move to some audience questions. We have quite a few. I don't know how many I'll get to, but I'll start with an easy, short one at least, I think. So the question is, there's various questions about community contributors and how they are compensated, and so. And then there's also a question about sustainability for you guys, about what opportunities there for small community news efforts to collaborate to achieve economies of scale. So one is just, how do you pay people if you're able to pay folks who are covering meetings, and what opportunities there to collaborate and achieve scale that way.
Well, how we compensate all of our folks that are part of, we work with them in a way where we fundraise, so that way when we're doing these projects that we have the money to pay them, because we're not going to ask for anyone to do anything without compensation. We just don't believe that. So for us, it's just fundraising for that. We are a nonprofit. We started out small as well. It was 6 of us. I was the 6th person hired in 2019, and we've grown since then. We're about 18 now. But it's just really about, grants, fundraising, and we have a modifier, which is our Results Philly's home for economic for professional development, and we do consulting work. So we're trying to sustain our work by also doing consulting work with other news organizations. So that's what it is. It's just really raising money, getting philanthropy money to try to make sure we're compensating anyone that does any work with Resolve Philly.
Yeah.
Great.
So apologize.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, with Black by God, it's I think of us as a social enterprise. So we are, a mix of seeking grants, and we have a fiscal sponsor, and then partner that beside. We're just starting advertising sales on our website, newsletter, and then third and fourth, we have a shop, Black by God shop. You can buy t-shirts from us, and then we also try to do some events that folks are interested in. So it's a mix, but for us, our sustainability is really going to be on the amount of grants and resources that we're able to bring in.
So I manage the digital side of our newsroom, and we compensate like all of our freelancers for storing. It's like a scale depending, how many sources they have, how intensive the story is, and on our broadcast side, we also compensate for broadcast packages around the country, because we are everywhere. But we're also funded like in various ways, like with philanthropic contributions, advertisers, and individual donations too.
Great. So this was, I thought, a very interesting question. The question is, are there ways that grounded reporting can challenge or contribute to a broader narrative of economic justice in the country and help shift the pathological assumptions, and the wording of the questioner, that our current economic order is built on? So, question about, challenging narratives of capitalism and so forth.
I believe.
Go ahead.
I believe through the investigative reporting and stuff like that. I know for us, that's what when we're focusing on, systemic or economic change, or looking at it through the lens of, okay, how do we do a reporting, solutions-based reporting that can uncover some of these things that are happening in our communities that are oftentimes keeping Black and brown communities down. We want to report in a way that is solutions-based, but also fact-based, so we can make sure that we are equipping our communities with the knowledge or the education that they need in order to be able to combat these things. So it's really about the investigative reporting and finding out what is going on and seeing if there's corruption, to try to expose that as well. I hope that answers the question. I was trying to get in the way, but I think that's what they were asking.
And I was trying to figure out how to answer that too.
Well, like I sometimes say, like the phrase "the free market" gets repeated by journalists all the time, as if there were a free market, Like there are common phrases that actually reinscribe what is normal, uh, a normal notion of the economy that actually are very inaccurate and obfuscate rather than clarify. So I think that's kind of what the questioner is trying to get at. Either Crystal or Jordan, anything you want to add? Yeah.
I know one, I mean, I can only think of an example when our editor at large, Mark Trahant, did his Indigenous economics project, and he was trying to, highlight areas that haven't been covered before, and one was gaming and corporate boards. So he looked at for a year in a couple stories actually of this big project that, and I don't want to say numbers because I might get it wrong. It's been a while. But he was saying like how of all the corporate boards that he gathered on this database, that there was very little to no representation of Indigenous people, and including when you look at the gaming industry, a lot of Indian gaming brings in millions of dollars. I think that's over half of the industry is Indian gaming, yet all the gaming corporate boards don't have any Native representation, and they're very successful, right? And they not only provide economic opportunities for their own people, but even sometimes their own counties, right, around people and for non-Native folks too. So he tries to look at the gap in that industry. But I can find the link and I'll throw it in the chat for everyone.
Okay, that would be great, Jordan. Well, let me go to another audience question. And I think this kind of falls a little bit on what Derek was saying earlier. What are you learning about how to balance or reconcile the watchdog sort of investigative function of journalism with, what's sometimes called solutions journalism or constructive stories? I know we think about this at MPQ. We try to do both, but how do you strike that balance?
Well, I think with Black by God, we are, we're just not able to do the investigative reporting that we really want to do. I mean, I am trying, to apply for grants. There's a very important story. How did the opioid crisis impact the Black community in Central Appalachia that hasn't been told? I can tell you now the numbers of Black families that are impacted by overdose and death and incarceration. But yet the story that's told in America is quite often of Appalachia's, white problem, right? Which is, white folks. And although that's true, there's many other layers to the story. So that's an example of a story that needs investigative reportive that Black by God hopes to tell. But the one that I think everybody could start paying attention to, and that is really just, what does your local media landscape look like, right? In West Virginia, the West Virginia Press Association will tell you in 45 years, they've only known of 3 Black reporters, and I'm one of them. Why? How? And get started there. And I think that also starts to unravel a little bit of, what is economic justice and all of these things. When you just can look at your local media landscape, right, and know that publications like the ones that you're meeting here today exist in the world and many others, and really report on that and talk about that. And I think that can make a difference. And I think that opens up communities to more questions. And if we can be critical or critique or whatever word you want to put in there of our local media landscape and what it needs, and I think we will be a more informed public and we'll get better stories. And most importantly, we will inspire people to want to be the next journalist and the future of journalism. And what I learned from the young people that I work with in Black by God is that everybody loves a ProPublica story. Everybody loves one, right? But who's really reading them, right? And I say that because I know that my audience is not, to a certain degree, reading long form investigative pieces, right? I've asked them, that's what they say. So I'm going to meet them halfway, right? I'm going to meet them, I hope, in 2024 with more auditory stories, with more visual stories, different ways of reaching a public. Because when you talk to a news consumer that has not been consuming, right, ProPublica stories and other long form investigative stories, then, we have an opportunity there to not critique what's been done in the past, but to look at different ways of telling stories in the future.
Yeah, we we do have an investigative reporter that I mentioned earlier, and he's just focusing on the foster care system. It's called his pieces. I mean, his initiative is called Our Kids, and that's what all he focuses on. But how we do it, how do we balance that, is by working with our collaborative partners of the 29 news organizations, because we have print, we have radio, we have broadcast, and everyone's telling those stories. We're talking about the same topic, but telling those stories in a different way to their audiences. So it's just working with news organizations to understand that we're not competition, we're not in a silo, we're working together to tell these stories in a way that's also reaching so many more people by doing through the different methods of media.
Great. So another audience question. So it says a staple of local journalism, and maybe it should be say a statement of local legacy journalism is, justice and crime. How do you try to provide responsible and responsive coverage that goes beyond sort of the old adage of if it bleeds, it leads?
That comes from our communities. They say all the time, we're tired of seeing these negative pieces being written, especially about my community. We don't want to hear it anymore. So that's why we work with them to come up with and work with them and having these more, not just positive stories, because it's positive too, but just real life stories, stuff that other than just if it bleeds, it leads, then we're going to put it in there. It's more about getting to know those communities, and those communities got a lot to say, a whole lot to say. So that's how we do that. We focus on what the community needs are, and we also focus on what they want to read and what they want to know more about. So that's what we focus on. It's just working with communities. I can't say it enough.
I put it in the chat here earlier, but one of the lines that my predecessor always said was, "How do we make a reader smarter every day?" And I feel like that kind of helped us reframe how to serve our readers. And also, I think for at least for our audience, Native people have been portrayed stereotypically. So the Indigenous Journalists Association made a bingo card for non-native newsrooms to use. So if your goal is to not get a bingo, because that's how you are portraying Native people with stereotypes and just in a negative light. But at least for our numbers, I mean, for ICT, we've seen it's a whole mix, right? People do want to see what cool opportunities Native people are achieving. All right, we have a cabinet secretary right now who is Pueblo, and that's the first ever for a Native person to achieve that level of office. So it's a mix of everything that's happening, and to capture what we look like today in 2023.
Great, thanks. So there's a question here about how you measure the impact of your work, both short-term and long-term. And there's a shout out to you, Crystal, about what you said about the rinse and repeat nature of funding local newsrooms, and what is one thing you wish funders knew about the broader field of journalism?
That's a tough question when we talk about measuring impact. I know for us, if my co-AD was on here, she would say, "Oh, I know what they're going to say." It's tough to measure. I understand grant writing and the things that they want to see in that in order for you to get money, but we measure our success from, for an example, a community member. We had a listening session, and the community member came up to me after the listening session. It was from 6 to 8 o'clock on a Thursday night. And she came up to me afterwards and said, I saw the flyer for you guys coming to our community center to have this conversation. And I thought about not coming, but I said, I'll come for about a half an hour, see what it's about. But ended up staying the whole 2 hours, 2.5 hours, or whatever it was. And she's like, "I'm really glad that I did." To us, that's success. Because for us, it means that you took the day out of your time, took time out of your day to come to our meeting, to have this conversation, and it was helpful for you to be there. Those types of things aren't measured a lot of times in these grant writings and grant reporting. So we measure success by the community members' opinion about how we make them feel, the trust building. We also think it's important when they're coming back. They're also coming and they're bringing a friend next time, because they say, "You know what? I trust this media organization. They're coming into my community, and I want to let my community know that you guys are doing great work and we trust you." So that's how we try to measure. That's how we measure success. But oftentimes those things they're not sexy for the grant writing or proposals and stuff in there. So it's just hard to do that. And sometimes I get a little frustrated with that, because it's so important, because that builds over time. And these grant writers, these grant people the people that are doing the funding and philanthropists, they don't understand that it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Marathon, not a sprint. Good line. Anyone want to add to that?
Well, I think I do a lot of audience engagement conversations. And then sometimes, one day I was having a bad day. It's hard to run a little paper. And I just used my Twitter voice and said, you know what? I'm having a bad day. What do y'all think about Black by God? And I was overwhelmed with the amount, it went kind of, West Virginia viral, and was overwhelmed with the comments and had no idea, really didn't, the diversity of people inside the state, from politicians to school teachers, Black and white, and, everything in between, that was really paying attention to Black by God. So I'm thankful, that I was vulnerable to throw out a tweet like that, and something as simple as just asking folks, right? I got a tremendous amount of feedback that kept me going and really helped me see, you know what? There's a lot of quiet people. As my mom used to say, a lot of people are watching you and you might not know that they're watching you, right? And I think that goes the same for our publications. So, I believe in asking folks and really having enough courage to listen to the critique, however it comes.
Great. Another audience question here. What recommendations do you have for community-led news projects that aspire to have a sustainable economic model? So we know that it's not uncommon for startups to rely on volunteers or lower wages to balance the books. How do you manage that tension?
Well, I think for us, I remember being in the NCAI basement when I first year, and Mark was like, do I hire another reporter or a business manager? And I was like, I don't know. Because I was very new, and I was like, I feel like if we need to keep going, we need more business people. We can get all the creatives we want, but we need to balance like the business with the editorial. And that's what I'm really, having. We need people who know how to do it, who know how to build those relationships, who know what's going to work for us and what's not going to work. So I'm all for building the business news side.
All right. Let's see. What other questions do we have? Well, this is kind of interesting hypothesis. Or the question is, well, obviously this webinar is co-sponsored by the Institute for Nonprofit News, so that is a national coalition of local nonprofit newsrooms. But what would or could an ideal national coalition look like? Was the question.
Me. Okay, so I don't know what a national coalition looks like, but what I want to see is small publishers. I want to meet Jordan. I want to meet Derek. I want to meet MLK 50. I want to meet all of these publications that, I pay attention to and know that we're all sort of in the same, whatever you want to call it, niche game, I guess. And so to me, it's less about building a coalition, and it is kind of the way I look at Black by God, which is if you put good people in a room together, something magic's going to happen. So I would love for a funder to just fund the capacity for small and diverse and niche news publications to be able to meet each other, for a 1-day, 2-day conference, and then let us build community and then figure out what maybe next steps should be.
Plus one to that. That's all I got to say.
Okay. Well, here's an interesting question. What are keys to organizing a listening session in a community? So if somebody wants to do the type of work that you do, Eric, for example, what are some key steps that they should be taking?
First, shut up and listen. Number one. Go out in the community, sit back, take it all in, because they got a lot to say. So 1, 2, being transparent about why you're there. 3, understand the communities that you're going to talk to. And also understand that not every community organization that's in the community is doing the right work or doing the good work. One thing I noticed when we're in the communities, oftentimes community members will tell us, oh, this organization, yeah, on paper, they look like they're doing so much in my community, but they're not. So understanding that these communities, that these organizations that are coming in these communities all the time, they may not always be doing the work, and community members will let you know that. And also get to know the aunties, the uncles on the block captains. Those people are beautifully entrenched in their communities. Talk with them, work with them, oftentimes they can tell you so much more than what these organizations claim that they know about these communities. So I think just getting to know those communities, starting there, go out to a block party, go to an event at the library in the community, show up where they are. I think it's important when you want to start and let them know who you are and build your relationships that way.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to try to get one more audience question in, and then maybe a closing question for all of you guys. But how can movement groups and organizations support the community reporting and investigative work you do? Besides sending press releases or pitches, what is actually most helpful?
Well, I think that, like Jordan said, I'm always torn between, do I invest in the creative or do I invest in the business? So I think a lot of nonprofits and other folks out there could help by sharing their services, right? There's accounting services. There's, I don't know, share your Zoom account. I mean, there's different levels to different things, but I think there could be some more skill sharing and some more tool sharing between, established nonprofits and community leaders that want to, help small publications.
Also, I'll add to that, feedback is extremely important. I think having that feedback from communities to say, are we doing a good job? What are we missing? That feedback is how we are able to continue to do our work, but also do it in an effective way where it's helping your community. So I think that's the most powerful thing that a community member could do when it comes to news organizations in that community, is to give them the feedback.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I would second that too. I mean, I make it a point to go to community events just to listen to them. And if somebody says, "Oh, we love the newscast, we love it," I'm like, "All right, but what could we do better?" Or is there something you were looking for that you didn't get? And then they'll tell me, and then I'll bring it back to the newsroom too.
Okay, so last question, I wanted to ask if you could comment on what is the ecosystem of support that will help nonprofit and community-based media like yourselves thrive?
Definitely community involvement within the storytelling. We know we have to build those relationships and build trust. Oftentimes people don't, they look at journalists and media in a way where and rightfully so, where they're a little skeptical coming in. But once you build those relationships, I think having them a part of the process, I think would be beautiful. I think that would help us continue to thrive and also show the legacy newsrooms that these nonprofit news organizations, they got it going on. We understand how to build community and work with community. So I think that would be probably the best way, in my opinion.
Jordan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think maybe we just like sharing our stories too and sharing what we're about. And yeah, I can't, there's so many things. I don't have time for all of them.
Well, pick one. Go ahead, Crystal.
I was going to say, I'll give the basic plug here. Please sign up for our newsletter. Go to our website right now and share a story. Send some money and send your talent, right? And your creativity and your ideas. Like Derek said, that feedback matters. And I would really appreciate anyone listening to look at our stories and, help us understand, how does this fit into a national context? These are West Virginia stories, but these are American stories. And I think that they have the capacity, at least my goal with Black by God, is that our West Virginia stories will bubble up into a national conversation.
Well, great. And there's a message in the chat which mentions that the Institute for Nonprofit News offers some recommendations for helping advance the field. So encourage folks to look at that. And I just want to close with thanking the panelists. Crystal Good from Black by God, the West Virginian, Jordan Bennett Bagay of Indian Country ICT, and Derek Kane from Resolve Philly, or the Philadelphia Journalism Collaborative, I guess it's now being renamed. So thanks so much to all of them, and to all of you for your excellent questions. And I hope we got to as many as we can, and look forward to continuing this conversation. And expect more webinars in the new year. Again.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody.